And we're live.
Good morning, everyone. We'll do roll call in about 30 seconds. All right, good morning. It is officially 9:30, so we'll call this meeting to order. Excellent, there we go. So I feel like I'm getting slight feedback from somewhere. Is it from me? Should be no speakers here. Oh, it's the world we exist in. There will be a slight amount of feedback. This is my first time back in City Hall in a while, everyone, so I just have to get used to it. I will deal with this. All right, well, let's start with a roll call. Councillor Banga. Councillor Banga.
I don't see Councillor Banga on the meet.
All right, we'll come back around. Councillor Cartmel.
Good morning.
Good morning. Councillor Katarina.
Good morning.
Good morning. Councillor Zadig.
Good morning.
Good morning. Councillor Esslinger.
Good morning.
Good morning. Councillor Hamilton.
Good morning.
Good morning. Councillor Henderson.
Morning.
Good morning. I am here. Councillor McKean.
Morning.
Good morning. Councillor Nickel.
Morning.
Good morning. Councillor Paquette.
Just chilling.
Very good. Councillor Walters. Oh, wait, Councillor Walters sent me a note. He would be just a little bit late, so he'll be joining us as soon as possible. Is Mayor Iveson on with us today?
He's planning on joining, but is not on the meet at the time.
All right, that's fine. He can join whenever he wants. That's the benefit of the committee. I'll just do a loop back around for Councillor Banga. I don't believe I see his name on the list of participants, so that's okay. We have enough to get going. I'll start with a motion to adopt the agenda. Councillor Esslinger?
I'm happy to move the agenda.
Thank you very much. We're committee, so we just need a mover. Great. Any questions about the adoption of the agenda? Seeing none, I realize I should have logged in, but we will call the vote, and that will give me enough time to log in. And sorry, the delay is solely me, everyone. I'm just I'd forgotten to log into eScribe here. This is what happens when you're used to doing it from home. Here we are. It's my first day, apparently.
Live each day that way, Andrew.
Very good. I did get my vote in now. Are we?
We're missing Councillor Paquette.
Councillor
Well,
Paquette.
didn't come in, so I'm a yes.
And if that's everyone, we can display the vote. And that is carried. Excellent. Approval of the minutes. Can I get someone to move the approval of the minutes from the November 3rd and January 26th meetings?
Happy to move that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor McKean. That's the November 3rd, 2020 Council Services Committee and the January 26th, 2021 Code of Conduct Subcommittee. Please vote. Or any questions, error, or omissions? Not hearing or seeing any, then please vote. There it is.
We have all the votes.
Excellent. Please display the vote. And that is carried. There we go. Perfect. Thank you. Sorry, I realize I don't have the big screen on that way, so I'll just keep my eye behind me there. And protocol items. I don't believe there are any. So next up, selection of items for debate. I'll go to the speakers list. I'll keep an eye out for that. There may. I will call people once I see the list. Just hang tight. I don't. I believe many of you have probably signed in because this is a good meeting here.
It may just be my device, but I cannot join the speakers list.
Okay, just hang
Same
tight.
here.
Hang tight. We are just sorting out the starting of the speakers list, which may have just been activated. So I'll let you all try to click in again. Councillor Henderson was first. Councillor Henderson.
Yeah, so I have I'm sure others are going to select others, so I'll leave them, but I had a quick question on 6.6.
On 6.6, great, thank you.
I think everything else, I'm prepared to leave it for others.
Okay, wonderful. I see Councillor McKean on the board.
Yeah, and similarly, I have a question on 6.4.
6.4, excellent. Councillor Cartmel.
6.1, please. 6.1 and 6.2.
Thank you. I don't see anyone else on the list. That would leave us remaining 6.3 and 6.5. So if I'm not seeing anyone on the board, is someone willing to move those remaining items?
So moved?
Thank you, Councillor Essinger. Please vote. Vote is coming. Oh, and I realized my camera wasn't on. My apologies, everyone. The vote is coming soon. It is on its way, I think. There it is.
And just Councillor Paquette, please.
I am a yes.
And that's all the votes.
Excellent. Please display the vote. And that is carried. Wonderful. Madam Clerk, do you want to just read back what we've passed?
Thank you. This morning, committee has passed the following items without debate. Item 6.3, Council Chamber Ergonomics Status Update, and item 6.5, 2021 Common Furniture Office of the Councillors.
Perfect. Thank you very much. That's what I have as well. Next up is requests to speak. And there's one. I'm so excited. Request to speak at Council Services. It's a great day. I don't know if anyone else has the list in front of them, but to move the speaker. Then I'll just move. I have the list here, so I'm going to move that Council Services Committee hear from the following speakers, although it's really speaker in panels where appropriate, on item 6.2, Dustin Cook from the Edmonton Journal. Those are all the requests to speak, so please vote.
We have all the votes.
And please display the vote. And that is carried. Excellent. Requests for time specific, there are none. We've already set 6.1 as the first item of business, and there are no additional requests to speak. Councillor inquiries. I do not recall getting any advance notice of anything, so there we go. Well, in that case, I think we're ready to move on to item 6.1, social media policy for council. This is a report coming up from the Code of Conduct Subcommittee. And maybe I could send this over to the chair, Councillor Esslinger, for an introduction.
Thank you. This was discussed at the subcommittee, and a motion was made that we refer it here for a discussion on a draft social media policy.
All right. So, we've opened up the speakers list, I believe. I should check, were there any additional comments from administration on this?
No.
No, that's fair. Oh, sorry, I realized Councillor Cartmel had selected this, so I can actually just go to him to start. That was, instead of me sitting here, my apologies. Sorry, Councillor Cartmel, go ahead.
Not at all. Thank you, Councillor Neck. So I guess to start, I will confess to some confusion. I thought that when we talked about this, or when this was discussed at the subcommittee level, that there was a motion or a recommendation, or at least some guidance that said an actual social media policy would be crafted for discussion here, and it would be limited to the blocking and muting aspects. What I'm seeing in the meeting documents is the same material that was presented last week, unless I'm missing something. So I guess, am I missing something?
I can respond to that, Councillor Cartmel. Code of Conduct Subcommittee does not have the authority to pass that motion. It needed to come up to Council Services Committee for approval, which is why it's back here today. And so then if this motion were to carry, it would go up to Council, as Council needs to direct that action, and then at that point the policy would be developed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So do I have somebody willing to move the recommendation that came from the subcommittee? Okay, I don't hear anyone. I can move that.
Well, I'll move it.
Sure, that would be easier. Thank you, Councillor McKean. And just to read it out again for everyone, so it's in the report. It's that Council Services Committee recommend to City Council that administration prepare a draft social media policy for City Council that addresses blocking users and is based on Attachment 1 of the January 26, 2021 Office of the Integrity Commissioner report, and return to Council, and then once that is passed, return to Council Services Committee. There, we have some, we'll start again just with questions. Councillor Hamilton, do you have questions?
No, I wish to speak to the item.
Okay, I'll come back to you. I just want to check in with Councillor Paquette to see if he has questions first.
I do not have questions. I simply
Okay.
have opinions.
Very good. Well, we're about to get to those. Just to double check, anyone with questions? Councillor Henderson?
Well, just one, because for various different reasons, I have never really used my Facebook. It got really confused between my personal and my public, and it was not a useful tool for me. I doubt that'll change. So I'm just wondering, when we begin to talk about blocking, if we inadvertently create an expectation that we have these outlets to begin with. I don't think that that's the intent here, but just, I think I have chosen not to engage that way. I engage in other ways with my constituents. So I'm just a little bit concerned that we may open that door up. So just a question, it suddenly crossed my mind that we may inadvertently be creating that situation.
Just to check that, is that a question to to either Ms. Pytel
or I'm not sure who it's to.
Okay.
Whoever's in a position to answer that. I'm not sure whoever the drafter was, if whoever's drafting the policy or would be drafting the policy. I don't know. But
I see.
To Mr. Rathgeb or Ms. Pytel. One of them. I don't know which is the most appropriate person to answer.
I believe Ms. Pytel has unmuted, so I'll go to her. And we'll start your time too. I just noticed that clock isn't ticking yet.
Good morning. Yep. Councillor Henderson, you make a good point. And when we talked about this at committee or at the Code of Conduct Committee, what we're focusing on is the tools used to communicate with your constituents. If you're not using that as a tool to communicate with your constituents about council business and city business, then it shouldn't come into that.
Great. That was my assumption. I just thought I should ask to check. Great. Thank you. That's my only question.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, we can go to those who wanted to speak to it. Councillor Hamilton, you had originally clicked on, you're off. Did you want to start, or did you want to come back on after?
I'm fine to start.
Okay, go ahead.
I would encourage committee not to support this bylaw or the formation of this policy, I should say, for a number of reasons. At committee, I spoke about how we all have different experiences on the internet. And unfortunately, my experience has not been terribly positive. And I'm going to spare you some pretty ugly things today, although I honestly don't know why I would do that. It's mostly for your comfort and not for mine. My biggest point here, and I'm not talking about this to elicit sympathy or to claim that women have a harder time on the internet, but to talk about and spotlight really that the lived experience of people who in public spaces, of women, of people of color, of sexual and gender minorities is radically different than the lived experience on the internet of people who don't foreground those differences. And while I like I was reading up on, the history of internet studies last night, just for fun. The internet was originally thought to be this place of great equity, and yet early on, the notion of what they call participatory parity completely disappeared, because as soon as you identify as with one of those many differences, that gets weaponized. And why I think that this is relevant, because it's not just about the elected officials, it's not just about our own comfort, but it is also about the message that sends to people who are watching. So if you are watching your female or person of color elected representative and they are humoring the gendered and racist and sexist comments that come, and they do come, if you identify as any one of those things, that sends a message that space is not for you. And so it's not just about the elected officials and the time spent moderating these comments and humoring comments made in bad faith, but it's also about the message that sends to the public. So, but that maybe isn't, let's put that to the side. I think Councillor Henderson brought up a really excellent point about the expectations of contact. Currently, as councillors, we're only able to get administration support if contacts come in through official channels. We don't get support if it comes in through social media. So any contact, any communication done through social media is done essentially out of your ward budget or on your personal time. So I would say that's a disparity as well. And creating the expectation that you can contact your counselor in like 50 different ways is not reasonable. And I know at the provincial and federal level, a lot of MPs and MLAs limit the ways that they can be contacted because there's a liability to that. If people can send you messages through 50 different channels, then you're liable to miss something. So as I've said before, I struggle with using my staff time to answer questions or inquiries made in bad faith that takes them away from serving the legitimate and good faith inquiries of constituents. I'd also say we have a code of conduct policy that governs respectful communications. And I think that we've struggled with enforcing that. And so adding more to that is, to me, not reasonable. I think we need to sort through some of the challenges of that, let's call it enforcement, before we can actually reasonably add more to it. And the last thing I would say is that I'm concerned that this is a policy targeted at one individual and one individual's behavior. And I haven't been through a lot of elections, but I understand it's about reach and name recognition. And if you want to limit your reach and name recognition, that usually has a direct impact on your ability to be an effective elected representative. We're on the cusp of a municipal election here. I have a great deal of faith in the electorate, and I think we forget that the ultimate performance review that we all receive happens every 4 years, and it happens very publicly, and I think that we should just let that take place. So I won't be supporting this, and I really hope the rest of council doesn't support this either.
Thank you very much. Councillor Paquette?
Yeah, luckily, a lot of my time has already been used adequately through Councillor Hamilton. I think that I agree with almost everything she had to say. I'll add another layer on to that, and that is, when you've got minority voices or marginalized voices or anything like that, they face the same kind of issues that maybe most people going through their life will not experience. And on one hand, it has a chilling effect. And if we're really talking about equity and GBA plus lenses and all these sorts of things, we want everyone to participate. This policy actually makes it so that people cannot protect themselves, I think, and participate. The idea that folks who already face all sorts of extra struggles need to have an even thicker skin than previous does not fall under our GBA plus lens. We're asking folks who are the targets of a lot of different kinds of attacks to remain open to those attacks. And that doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. One compromise could be that if, let's say, someone was blocking people who were attacking them for all sorts of reasons that had nothing to do with their politics or policies. Maybe the recourse for the folks who are blocked is that they make their name public. They say, listen, I want to stand behind these words that I sent out into the world, and I want to make a complaint. I think that I should be able to call someone blank, 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 and let their name stand publicly. If that maybe is in the policy, that might change the conversation a bit, because it may actually encourage better behavior. It may not, but it might. Again, as with what Councillor Hamilton said, I'm certainly not going to be trotting out specific things that are written more about my family's heritage than about me. And frankly, I wouldn't want to. I believe that there is a service in making sure that other young Indigenous youth, for example, are not exposed to these things. They already are. But if I can be at least one place where they are not going to be exposed to that, I want to make it that place. I want them to see that they can engage in public service respectfully. I want them to see that they don't have to deal with hate on a daily basis. Or at least there's a place where they don't have to be immersed in it. And so I laud the effort to find something equitable, but this, as it stands, is not it. I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. Councillor Essinger.
Thank you, and I would urge you not to support it as well. I've thought about this since our last meeting and recognize, number one, this isn't really the time to introduce a new policy. We're going to be finishing our term, and any rules we put in place now time we have an investigation, they would have no impact on people. If there's a new council in the future and they choose to pursue something, that would be up to them. I also think it would only apply to official social media channels. I don't know about you, but I have seen the Facebook and Twitter become very nasty lately. And something Councillor Paquette said to me, and it's bothered me as well, because I'll get comments from my adult children to say, can you believe what people are saying about you? And not have the ability to stop that seems ridiculous. I don't think that it's creating meaningful discourse on the issues. And if we're not allowed to stop where it becomes inappropriate or no longer about the issue but a personal attack, why would we say that's okay? We shouldn't. I think if we want to look at having social medias, channels that are official and followed and monitored by administration, that would be something different. But these are with our names on, and we should have the ability to say that's not acceptable behavior. So a lot of my other comments have already been said, so please do not support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McKean.
Thank you. I supported this at the subcommittee, but Councillor Hamilton in particular completely changed my mind and reminded me of my core values, and perhaps reminded me of why I'm not running again for city council. And I would have been asked a lot about that, and I think in some ways it's a death by 1,000 cuts. And those cuts, some of them came online, some of them come in by email, some of them occur during our own deliberations. But I think I've long thought, and believe me, I'm do as I say, not as I do, but we should reach for the highest levels of civil discourse, and so I was influenced by somebody in and around my circles about the importance of not blocking people but I've totally changed my mind, and I think, Sarah, thank you. I don't think we should have to put up with trolling and bad faith comments and sexist comments and racist comments, and we should do all we can to live at a higher level and perform at a higher level of civil discourse, good manners, good faith debate in what we do. So yeah, I will now not be supporting this. And I'm lucky, I suspect, because I'm a white guy. And so I have to understand that the things that maybe someone like Aaron gets, or what Bev and Sarah see on their accounts are different than mine, and I bloody well better listen to those folks and their stories. And I'm sorry to hear that happens to people, and I can't imagine what it is about human nature that perpetuates that. But I also think there are many ways to access me. And if I block someone, I will suffer the consequences of that, because I did it once years ago, I think even before I was on council, and there was a bit of a show online about the fact that I'd done that. So we suffer the consequences of that decision too. But I suspect a lot of people, in the case of sexist comments, racist comments, just pure trolling, a lot of people are probably quietly cheering in the background. So Sarah and Bev, Aaron, thank you for your comments. You've helped remind me of my core values. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor McKean. And I realized that I could have let you close. My apologies, but I know you took the time anyway. We'll keep going for everyone. Councillor Banga.
Thank you. Sorry for joining in late there. I think a lot of comments that I was going to make, they are probably made already, but I am still going to add my tidbit in there. I totally agree with Councillor Hamilton and the others that, at times, I don't know what it is. being a politician nowadays, seems like you are open to abuse from everybody. And you don't agree with somebody, then you are, they just start posting stuff on your social media, and basically you have no choice. And especially in my case, when your kids or grandkids, they say, oh, this is again, that's what's going on the social media about you. And like, kids, maybe you can talk to them, but grandkids, I don't know. How do you tell them that that this is not actually, what you do? It's actually what those people, they feel that you should be doing. So, uh, yeah, it's frustrating at times, and what it does is basically takes people away from, I guess, politics. I talk to my grandkids, and every dad or granddad, they want their kids to kind of follow their footsteps. But once they see all uh, that negativity coming, and I don't think too many people want to probably go in that direction. Um, Especially, I, I mean, people. I have had comments from people like, the only reason you got elected because you are running as an East Indian in a heavily East Indian populated area, and that kind of hurts there. Not kind of hurts, but that hurts. But sometimes you have no recourse, and we are bound by all these rules. But those, I guess, social media folks, they have no rules on them. I know it's hard to enforce them, but again, I am agreeing with previous speakers that this is putting something extra uh, on ourselves, but there is no, I guess, no reason. I mean, if let's say I block somebody, then they know that I blocked them. They have the choice not to vote for me, and then, but it's my account, and if it's especially my let's say, other than the cities, I don't know how do you make the account to just say this is my city account. You can't be putting disclaimers on every statement that you make. So again, I am not going to support this, and I think there should be something that probably let the next council decide if they think we really need that. And for now, no support. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Avison.
Well, thanks. I'm reminded here of a phrase that has been helpful to me at times in this life and in this work, which is that an argument is about determining who is right, and a discussion is about determining what is right. And I think we're having a good discussion here. That's changing my thinking, because I did support trying to develop a policy at the subcommittee, and that's because of some very strongly held democratic ideals about the ways in which we ought to be accessible to the people that we serve. And I can hold those values strongly at the same time as I hold a value that I realize I was underprivileging in the previous discussion, which is the occupational health and safety of my colleagues and myself. Any impediment or discouragement to any one of us to blocking or muting folks who are spewing online hate, who are engaged in harassment, and
and Councillor Banga used the word abuse. This is psychological and emotional abuse that is directed at not just elected officials, but many public figures, folks in the media as well, people with any kind of public profile, and it's unacceptable. And just because we're democratically elected and accessible to people doesn't mean that our workplace should be less safe than other people's. Necessarily you see a certain amount of that in this life, but it is a bit heartbreaking to hear Councillor Banga talk about his grandkids being turned off by that, Bev's children having to see that. So far my kids aren't online, so they haven't had to see that about their dad, but that's a heavy thing to contemplate. So I think it is important that we have an expectation that we all have standards around how we're going to do this. And I think most of us have somewhere posted generally what we'll see as acceptable and the grounds on which we would restrict someone's participation on any of our forums. And I would encourage not just elected officials to do that by policy, but candidates in the upcoming election to do the same thing and be very transparent about it. And I think Councillor Hamilton's observation is correct. I think we're here because there is blocking because people disagree with you, which is about an argument about who is right. And then there's blocking because of issues of safety. And I don't think there's a clean way for us to police one without the other. And I think Councillor Hamilton's point that the public will see and be able to tell for themselves the difference between elected officials who are prepared to engage in a free and open debate about issues versus those who are curating, you know, a bubble of their own people who agree with them. I mean, I think that is what it is. I don't think we can regulate that or should regulate that, particularly if there's a trade-off around ease of implementation on the one hand, but more importantly, occupational health and safety on the other. And so I can't see a clean way to do this. And more importantly, that is to say, a way of doing it that's not burdensome for us administratively. But also, I don't think any one of us should be chilled or hesitated to limit engagement online with someone who's engaging in hate speech, harassment, or psychological or emotional abuse. And the fact that I came to believe for any length of time that it was acceptable and part of the job for us to have to deal with that is just, you know, me gaslighting myself. So I'm done with that. Because none of us deserves that, and particularly people from diverse communities and perspectives and identities who face additional barriers already to participating in community life don't need this one as well. So that point is very, very well taken today, and I think as an ally to that cause of seeing increased diversity. In these offices, I think I'm not able to support what's before us here today.
Thank you very much, Councillor Henderson.
It strikes me in listening to this discussion, and I was a bit ambivalent. I've been paying attention to it, but that we have very clear rules of engagement and decorum in the way we deal with the public in every other sphere. If someone came in front of council at a committee meeting or in other areas and said some of the things that they seem to feel free to say in some of these medium, we would instantly have rules to deal with that. And I'm not quite sure why this should be any different. I think back, I was very early on Twitter. The mayor and I actually, I think sat in council and jumped in fairly early on. He helped me come up with my Twitter handle. And it was a very, really useful tool at the beginning. I think it first happened during, the airport debate. And there were we realized a lot of people were watching us online, much to our great surprise, that were very interested in the debate. And it was a really useful tool for us to be able to communicate with them what was happening and to answer questions. And I thought it was a fabulous tool. And I've disengaged since, because at a certain point, it became useless as a tool of that kind of communication. I still pay attention, I still watch it, but I actually don't jump in because I think it has really deteriorated after that time from a really good tool of communication to not a very useful way to have discourse. And that's why I've disengaged. It's not because I'm a Luddite. I just didn't find it useful anymore. And I have no lack. I mean, my problem is that I get about well over 100 emails a day, and if I have too many other ways that I have to be paying attention, I would not get anything else done. So if I see stuff on Facebook, there's not a lot because I really haven't used it for a long time, or I see stuff on Twitter, I redirect them. I say, please send that to me as an email. We will lose it otherwise. And I've always, with my blog, we made a choice early on for it to be a one-way thing and not to create a place for discussion, because it just felt like a more useful use of the tool. So I think there's lots of ways that people can get in touch with us. I realize everybody makes their own choice, but I do think what we're talking about here is something that we would not be talking about in any other means, which is ability to maintain decorum and good communication tools and good discussion and good debate. And I think the problem with social media is it no longer provides that. And that's my frustration, whether that's my sadness about it, that's my disappointment in it. It's maybe been a little bit of a luxury for me that I have been able to make that choice and still stay in touch with people, because people have figured out really well how to get in touch with me in other kinds of ways. And I've always been absolutely vigilant about responding to my emails and don't want to lose the ability to be able to do that, because it allows me to respond to something in more than 240 characters. I do think if we were going to go down this road, I think we have to be very, very careful that we do not lose our ability to do what we do in every other setting in terms of our dealings with the public, which is have rules around decorum. And I think social media is appalling about having rules about decorum. And that's what's making it really difficult for us to grapple with this. And it has stolen from us what could have been a very useful tool. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Cartmel.
Thank you. I'll try not to repeat what others have said. I've struggled. So first of all, in the campaign in 2017, I made a point of emphasizing engagement, and I made a point of saying that what I'm going to try really hard to do is bring the work of City Hall out to the burbs, because it's so hard for the burbs to get to City Hall. And so I'm going to communicate in every way I can and receive communication in every way I can. And that includes social media. And I've really tried hard to do that. So I do try to capture all of the messages and the emails and the questions and things like that as they come up. And it's hard. It is, you invariably miss something all the time. So I get where Councillor Henderson is coming from. But at the same time, I've got a number of different cohorts that I'm trying to communicate with, and some of those cohorts only communicate on social media. So you run the risk of saying I'm only going to respond to emails that you miss some of those comments and some of that engagement, and I'm unwilling to shut that off. I understand the tension around the greater notion here that we've got some that will only give part of the story. That some are interested in fomenting discord by only telling part of the story or by misrepresenting what the actual discussion was. I'm not sure how do we stop that. We've seen the consequences of that recently in other places, where telling half the story or giving passive-aggressive tacit endorsement to a particular action results in institutions getting attacked. And I think that where some that have influence and have a voice do not use that voice carefully and in a considered way, they run that risk. And it makes work for everybody else to try to undo the unrest and the discord that some would foment. And that's regrettable, but I'm not sure what the tool is to move away from that. I was really moved by Councillor Hamilton's words the last time we talked about that. Councillor Esslinger and Councillor Paquette again today. Councillor Hamilton participated in a Facebook Live thing last night, and you see the comments that come up on as the video is playing. And last night, there's one person that is continually using, not curse words necessarily, but strident and disrespectful and awful language, quite frankly, and only at Sarah. And my 22-year-old daughter is kind of watching this go by at the same time. And I sort of said over my shoulder, I said, so, you want to be on city council? And she kind of gave me that look like, are you kidding me? Why would I do that? Why would I sit there and take that? Why would I try to do what Sarah's doing and just stony-faced looking into the camera and not reacting to that garbage? How would I ever support a policy that says she can't turn that off? She can't block that. My daughter can block it when she gets that crap from her school chums or from people that she's engaging with. But Sarah can't? Not a chance. And I think a lot of us are seeing that perspective. This notion of official channels, that somehow your personality, your face, your name, your persona is owned by the city when you get elected, that's a thread that's running through our discussions here. And I'm pushing back on that too. When we're talking about social media, if we're going to have official media channels, then set them up. And then maybe somebody within administration can moderate them. Maybe somebody in administration can block the crappy comments instead of, and when you hit May 31st, the sitting councillors can no longer post to those accounts. Maybe that's a solution. But what we're doing now is not fair. What this policy would consider is not fair. And I have similar concerns when we talk about what the standard that councillors are held to versus what other candidates are held to. I'm not sure that's fair either. There's policies we have in place that will not allow me to defend my track record, my votes, my positions, because I'm not allowed to go to public places where those things are discussed as a councillor, where candidates can go and criticize me, and I don't have a right to defend myself. That's a problem too. This idea that somehow we give up our ability to defend ourselves either as people or as elected officials or our positions simply because we're elected and we're held to a different standard that some call a higher standard, we really have to examine that. And I think it starts with rejecting this utterly and starting again. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'll jump in and then we'll finish off with Councillor Katarina. So yeah, I spent a lot of time thinking about it after the last discussion, and in my head I had created this scenario where I think it would have been possible to try to separate out folks who have a legitimate concern about being blocked about any level of government representative for just simply disagreeing versus the hatred that people get. And Mayor Iveson already talked about it and said, I really don't see it being possible. I thought it was, and after chatting with others and just reflecting on it more, I realized that it wasn't really possible to do that. The other challenge for me is that, in my case, my social media experience is very, very pleasant, actually. I love being on social media. I have great engagements. I have a handful of people who, poke and prod occasionally, but nothing offensive, nothing that I really worry about too much. And that positive experience, I think, clouded me a bit to the very negative challenges that others have seen. And appreciate Councillor Cartmel's reference to that town hall yesterday. I was watching a bit of that later and saw the same type of things, and even saw other people posting about it on social media that night. And as you see that and think about it, just like there's no way to properly separate those two things in a policy, as much as I'd like to see that done. So for me, I want to thank Councillor Hamilton and Councillor Esslinger, particularly last week, for being very vocal about that. My apologies that we had it sent here, because after thinking about it more, I realized that you were both very right in that, so I should have just voted it down at that point. But then also appreciate everyone's comments here and the reasons why we would want to not proceed with this. I think the points have been well raised that, you know, if you're blocking people just because you disagree with them, I mean, okay, that's seems silly to do, but I guess that's your choice. And then you'll have to be accountable to the folks that you represent in the city. That's really the best way to hold people accountable for that. And any way that we can try to help prevent the abuse that everyone else get. Like I've seen most everyone else get substantial levels of abuse on social media, and it's not fair to all of you for that. So my pleasant experience shouldn't overrule those negative experiences. And so thanks for being willing to share your thoughts and express, again, probably relive some pretty challenging language that you've received and even speaking to this motion. But yeah, I won't support it and really appreciate you sharing your perspective, and hope that by not doing this, you can really make sure that you're not receiving that abuse and hatred that's unfortunately many people are getting, and that's really disappointing and discouraging to see as we go forward. So thank you. Councillor Katarina?
Thank you. So please and thank you versus venom and bile. There's no question in my mind. I'm going to react the way I react, regardless of whether it's social media, emails, phone calls. If there's disrespect for the office, I'll react accordingly. Disrespect for myself personally, that's fine. But that's my take on it. If anything comes in as far as contradiction or requests, if the tone is please and thank you, I'll go out of my way. If the tone is venom and bile, to start with, you can smooch my you know what at the end of the day, and I really don't care. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Not seeing anyone on the board, so please vote.
Mr. Chair.
Oh, sorry, yes. Yes,
No,
Councillor McKean.
but I just, for the record, I made the motion and now I'm going to vote against it enthusiastically, and I don't know how the minutes would reflect that, but I'm uncomfortable that I actually made the motion earlier to get it on the floor, but I just wanted to say that on the record. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
The power of real discourse.
Yeah. Please vote.
I'm sorry. I hit yes by accident. Of all people, I meant no.
We will make that change. Thank you, Councillor Nicol.
Oh, sorry about that. Oops.
No need to apologize. We'll make that change before we display.
We've made that change.
We've already made that change. Thank you for that flag, Councillor Nicol.
Sorry.
No problems. We all press wrong buttons.
You mean it's not 12-1?
That's your conscience speaking.
And just waiting on Councillor Katarina.
That was pretty funny.
Sorry, who are we voting?
No for me, Madam Clerk.
Oh, thank you.
That's all the votes.
Those are all the votes. Please display the vote. And that has failed 0-13. Next up, early agenda distribution pilot project results. I don't believe there's a presentation. It doesn't show it on the screen.
Mr. Chair, there is not a presentation, but since we do have a speaker, there might be some benefit to giving some introductory remarks if you'd like.
Sure, if you have a few introductory remarks, we can do that.
Okay. So we've heard from council and their staff, the public, senior administration, and the media on the pilot project, and I think that what we've heard justifies the recommendation we put forward. The public seemed to agree in large part, thinking this was a positive change, that it would result in additional time to read, research, and prepare for meetings, that they would be better able to plan and schedule attendance at meetings. Some of the examples they spotlighted were travel and childcare, and there was it was clear that they felt it enhanced transparency. We also heard from council, and some of the same points were made. The points that were made were that it provides additional time to read, research, and prepare for the meetings, that there were more opportunity for residents to learn of upcoming items, and that there was an increased need, and that was it. There were some negatives that were brought up, but we feel that the positives outweighed the negatives. The negatives included there was an increased need to monitor agendas for changes, and responding to media could become problematic because of the length of time between the information being released and the meeting. As far as administration is concerned, 40% said that it was a positive change, 40% were unsure, and only 20% said no. We had 3 members from the media reply to the survey. They felt, those who did respond, of those who responded, 1 thought that it was a positive change and 2 thought that it wasn't. Those are basically the comments I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up, we'll hear from our speaker, Mr. Cook, and although I know he is probably well aware of the rules on this, I'll just read it out again. So each speaker is going to have 5 minutes to make comments. The clerk's going to run the official timer. However, the speaker may wish to use a timer at home too. When the speaker is finished, please stay on the line, as committee may wish to ask you questions at the end of the panel, which is a panel of 1. After comments from the public, committee may ask questions of city administration. I guess this probably should have gone without saying up front, but thankfully our speaker hasn't done that. Please refrain from using the chat function in Google Meet during the meeting, as it creates issues of decorum, provides unfair advantage, and interferes with the live stream. And additionally, remember to mute your microphone when you're not presenting or answering questions. And if you're experiencing any difficulties, of course, the Office of City Clerk has resources available to help. So.
It is.
Oh, there we go. Okay, perfect. Now up, and we're going to hear from Mr. Cook of the Edmonton Journal.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Councillor. Good morning, Council, Mr. Mayor, City Administration. Thank you for hearing from me on this very busy meeting day. I appreciate it. My name is Dustin Cook, and I'm the City Hall reporter for the Edmonton Journal, and have been for about the last year and a half. I had a speech written out last week and had to make some major edits after reading the report once it was published on Thursday. I am thrilled with the city's recommendation to permanently release agendas 10 days before meetings, and I'm asking council to support it. This will only support transparency and engagement, 2 areas in which I know the city strives for more daily. I believe releasing reports earlier to the public is the single best way the city can improve in these areas. Currently, agendas are scheduled to be released the Thursday prior to a week of meetings at around noon. For committee or council meetings on Monday at 9:30 a.m., this provides 1 clear business day before the meeting. Providing reports earlier will give more time for the public to read through and comprehend sometimes hundreds of pages of information that has a direct impact on their lives and their relationship with the City of Edmonton. It will give more time for residents to form an opinion, decide if they wish to speak and address council, sign up to speak, and write a comprehensive opinion to share with all of you. I see this only as a positive for a more engaged discussion. The public deserves time to be able to go through and understand what is being discussed by their elected representatives. They deserve to know what is being debated and decided. This is only amplified during the COVID-19 pandemic. Lots of things are changing, new reports are being brought forward to support businesses and residents, and people have a right to know about how the city is responding. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention how I believe this change would also support us, both myself and you as council. It would allow us more time to read through all the documents and understand them. I don't know about all of you, but the financial documents and I are not the best of friends. I went into writing because I don't do math. More time to crunch the numbers and ask questions of the city's finance team would be beneficial for understanding and accuracy. It will give us more time. It will give you more time during your busy schedules full of meetings. I know because I watch almost all of them, to read the reports and await our calls for your comment. Now, as per the Stakeholder Survey, it appears some other media don't feel the same way I do on this matter, and so I won't speak for them, as I was that one vote in favor. What I will say is I believe that this change isn't really about us. I'm okay with being scooped on a story. It happens. This all goes back to providing information to the residents of Edmonton. It will allow you as councillors to respond to concerns and engage with residents about reports headed to committee. It will allow the media to share with residents what is being presented to council, again, to improve that transparency. For residents who don't actively refresh the city agenda page at noon every Thursday like myself, stories and media could be their way of staying informed about what is happening under the City Hall pyramid. This is about our shared duties to serve the public the best we can. All that said, I do still have some lingering questions on how this will work. Will this essentially mean a continuation of the pilot process, so reports will continue to be released on Thursdays, but just a week earlier? Or will they be released 10 days before each meeting, meaning reports will be available almost every day? I, for one, very much appreciated the pilot. I think it helped improve getting the information out to the public and allowed the media to read through everything well in advance. Now, I know the pilot came with some concerns and shortfalls. For me, the fact that some reports weren't ready to go isn't one of them. As much as I didn't like seeing report to be distributed when available for something I was planning to write on, I at least was able to see what was on the agenda. That is incredibly beneficial. The only current way to see well into future meetings is the items due list, which changes so frequently and seemingly without warning. I know the city does its best to ensure reports are complete on time, and I understand the lengthy process. So as long as agendas are up on time and those pending reports are listed on the agenda, I don't see an issue. To conclude, whatever can be done to improve the timeliness of information being released to the public would be beneficial for us all. I would like to thank Eileen, the Office of the City Clerk, and the communications team for listening to my feedback on this over the last several months. And thank you to the councillors who have also spoken with me on this topic and asked for it to come back to committee rather than a memo so we can have this discussion in public. So, to no one's surprise, I am very much in favor of the recommendation and hope you can support it today. Thank you very much for your time, and it feels very weird for me to be saying this, but I'm free to answer any questions that you may have for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I see there's already Councillor McKean who's ready to ask questions. So, Councillor McKean, who's ready to go. Go ahead.
Dustin, I see your face has disappeared. You're still there, though. No, I wanted to say that this is kind of the opposite of a press conference, isn't it? We get to ask you the questions. But I really just want to click on and say, though I thought your presentation needed a bit of editing for length, it took courage to do that. And thank you very much for doing that on behalf of the media. So thank you. That's it. You're off the hook.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Councillor McKean. I don't know if that was quite out of order, but we're done. So, any other questions? I'm not seeing.
Just on a certain article, but I'll let it pass.
Thank you, Councillor Paquette. I'm not seeing any other questions. Thank you, Mr. Cook, for joining us. And you may stay on if you'd like, or if you just want to watch from YouTube. You know how it works, so I think you'll be okay. Thank you. Next, we'll move to questions of administration. The speakers list is open. I'm also happy if there's no questions, I'm always happy to just take the motion in the report.
I'll move that.
Thank you. Yeah, you've moved that. And sorry, again, I forgot to write down all of who selected. Councillor Cartmel, you selected this. Sorry, my apologies. You should be the one to go first.
I did, and that's fine.
No questions.
I have no questions, and I'm happy to have Councillor McKean move the.
Okay, right. Sure. Thank you, Councillor Cartmel. Appreciate that. I do see Councillor Henderson is on the board. Go ahead. Well,
I'm just intrigued by this idea that Mr. Cook brought forward of not releasing them all in one great swath on the same day. I don't think we've ever thought or discussed. Maybe others have. I hadn't. I'm just curious, just to follow up a little bit on that. I don't know if that makes it easier or harder. I think probably a question to the clerk's office.
Yeah, would you like me to jump in with some thoughts, Councillor Henderson?
Yeah, I'm just curious about it. I just had never occurred to me before. It's always kind of being a given that they come in one great big swath.
It has occurred to us on many, many different occasions over, I think we're into our second decade of contemplating how we could release agendas in a more timely fashion. So appreciate the feedback from Mr. Cook and as well from all of you councillors. From a logistical point of view and based on the resources that we have and some great learnings we've had about how flexible and nimble we need to be during a pandemic, there are great efficiencies to be gained by providing the agendas on a single day. So we are always happy to go back and look at I think Mr. Beaudry and I have done many exercises with calendars and thinking about releasing agendas every single day, which we absolutely have the technology to do. One of the feedback that we usually get when we have contemplated that previously is then we're actually releasing materials while you're actually sitting in a number of other meetings. So the reason that Thursdays are chosen is typically, and where possible, we don't schedule council meetings or committee meetings on that day. But again, with elections come new opportunities to revisit your schedule. And so while the pilot project we're recommending concludes, we will make it, if this motion passes, we can bring the appropriate amendments to the bylaw. But should council want to revisit its calendar or its own agenda release process at any time in the future, just to Mr. Cook's point, nothing is permanent, but we'll definitely take it, move it forward if it passes. And then I think we always have to go back and revisit how this works. But from a logistical point of view, releasing agendas on Thursdays has many, many benefits.
Great, thanks. That's helpful. And when we used to have paper agendas, obviously, and they had to be hand delivered, I mean, it made sense. Obviously now that we're not doing that anymore, it opens some doors. But I think it's only worth, I think, doing it. I was just intrigued by the question. I hadn't really thought it through or not. I've just, and I wondered if it would make the load easier for you, ironically.
We do still provide paper copies when it is required, so we do require having staff here in the office.
Right. Okay, thanks. That's my one question.
Thank you. Any other questions? Not seeing anyone on the board for questions. Anyone wishing to speak to it? I'll give it a second there. I will very, very quickly, and I will click on to make sure I'm there. There we go. Just quickly, because I feel like I want to, again, this is going to be Thank Councillor Hamilton Day for her great work. She brought this original motion forward for the draft pilot, and I'm a big fan of the 10-day piece. I talked about it before when it was first brought up, but before I was on council, working in a retail environment and having a lot of interest in city government was not easy to navigate 3 days notice to plan for if I, as somebody who was working, needed to take off time to come to City Hall. And so I was always frustrated about that, about not being able to properly plan around these really important issues. So I just want to thank Councillor Hamilton for first raising it and then for making sure this came back to committee and didn't get just sent in a memo, because I think it's going to help a lot of folks. And this gives us our best opportunity to make sure people are engaged in what we're doing. Not everyone will take us up on the offer to read things 10 days in advance, but being able to have that coverage, being able to make sure that's being communicated early gives people a far better opportunity than they had in the past and allows them to plan how they want to be involved in what we do. So I actually think this is a really important permanent change that we're making. So I just wanted to, again, offer my thanks to Councillor Hamilton for first raising it. That's it. Thank you. And I don't see anyone else on the board. So Councillor McKean, do you have any closing thoughts?
No, sir.
Thank you. Please vote.
The ballot should be coming your way.
Yes, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Councillor Katarina. We're missing a few. Councillor Banga
Yes, for Zadok.
Thank you. And Councillor Esslinger
Yes?
and Councillor Walters.
I'm a yes.
And Councillor Banga?
Councillor Banga? Councillor Banga, final check-in. If we don't hear from you, I see you're on the board, just want to give you a chance to unmute. Final call, Councillor Banga. All right, we'll have to show him his absence on this vote.
And that's all the votes.
Please display the vote. And that is carried. 11-0. Thank you. Next up is item 6.4, policy C618, councillors' budget and expenses. And my apologies, this is the problem I did. It was Councillor McKean or Henderson? It was McKean that selected this one.
And I had one area of questioning I had on this.
Perfect. I'll go ahead, please. And just double check. There's no opening comments from administration on this, correct?
Nope, we're happy to answer any questions that council has.
Perfect. Councillor McKean, go ahead.
And Eileen, I don't know if you'd be the one to answer this, to be honest, but it has troubled me because I don't know the answer to this. We have our hard-working office staff, and mine will have been with me for 8 years by the time I end my term on City Council. And I just wondered if there's any severance or transition allowance for our office staff.
I'll ask Ms. Perrotin to take that question. Thank you, Councillor McKean.
Councillor McKean, in the contracts for the staff, if the severance is in the contract, then yes. They do need to meet the terms of the severance clauses within the contract. So, for example, they need to be here till the end of the term, which will be October 25, 2021.
You know what any of the other terms would be?
Not offhand.
We can take that offline with you, Councillor McKean, because I wouldn't want to speak for all of the contracts, but we can take that offline and discuss that with you.
That would be perfect. Thank you. That's all my questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Are you willing to move the recommendation?
At the risk of moving too many items today, I'd be happy to move that.
Thank you. And this is just to receive for information. I don't see anyone else on the board for questions.
So just to clarify, if you receive this for information, just to check, does committee want us to come back with the policy amendments as outlined in the attachment?
That was my understanding of the next steps, was it not? That if we receive this for information, that was going to happen? Or do you need a separate motion to make those amendments?
Just to make sure we all have the same understanding of what the next steps.
Yeah. So just to confirm again, receiving for information does involve moving forward with the next step, which was to consult with members of council and consider further changes, and that they'll come back at a later time with the feedback gathered. Councillor Henderson may have a question now, I see, just to make sure.
Yeah, well, one I would be interested too in an answer from my perspective, from my staff's perspective, for Councillor McKean's question. But I also realized I had one other that flagged for me. And are we suggesting a change in how airfare and hotel bookings are done? Because I've always known that we had the ability to use the corporate credit card, but it's always been much simpler for me to do it myself and get reimbursed. There's a huge other level of clumsiness that, especially now that so many of these bookings can be done online, it's way easier for me to do my own flights, use my own credit card and get reimbursed. So are we saying I would not be able to do that anymore?
Councillor, you would be able to do that. This just provides you the option.
Perfect. Yeah, and that option always existed, though, did it not?
Yes, but the policy just needs a cleanup to strike that
Okay,
sentence.
I'm fine as long as it doesn't rule out that us doing the booking and getting reimbursed. It just my experience was it was for the amount of bookings that I was having to do, it was clumsy going that way, and I'm more than happy to wait the month to get reimbursed. So thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Paquette.
Oh, I thought I took my my name off. Sorry. My question has been answered.
Excellent. Any other questions? Anyone wishing to speak? Seeing none, please vote.
Yes, Madam Clerk.
Yes. Yes, Walters.
We're missing two, Councillor Esslinger and Councillor Paquette.
I am a yes.
Thank you.
I'm a yes. Well,
And that's all the votes.
Thank you. Please display the vote. And that is carried 11-0. Thank you. And last is item 6.6, the 2021 Common Travel Plan, Office of the Councillors. And this was selected by Councillor Henderson.
Yeah, just a quick question about the FCM annual conference. It's only got 2 of us written down there as appointees. I don't know what the assumptions are about how many people are going to attend. At this point, I'm pretty sure it's going to be virtual, but there will be a conference fee. And I would hope with it being virtual that many of us can go and engage. So I don't, 7,000 may well cover it. I don't, but I know there's still debate about how much the conference fee will be. And I would just say, having been very engaged in the sustainability conference in FCM, done the virtual conference. I mean, that went brilliantly as a virtual conference. I would highly recommend it. It was in some ways more successful because more people could attend. So it was just a flag that we have that in the right way.
Absolutely, Councillor Henderson. All councillors are eligible to attend and have it covered out of the common travel budget. So we could bump that up to 12,000 instead of the 7,000. At the time of writing the report, I had 5 councillors indicate that they were not planning to attend, but we could just put it in as 12, and then that way, if everyone wishes to, and it is held virtually, registration fees being thereabouts 1,000, then that would cover everyone.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to be quite that high, but they could be close-ish. It was more the fact that the way it looks is it's just the way it's written right now with us as the appointees. It looks like we're the only 2 going, and I don't think that's the intention. I just wanted to double check that as well.
Correct. That's not the intention, Councillor. That's just listing who is appointed.
Okay, great. Thanks.
So, Councillor Henderson, are you willing to move with the revised attachment 1?
Yeah, yes, and we'll do that revision to 12,000. I suspect we won't need that much money, but I think we should. That's still way less than we would usually spend. So.
Okay. So I'll take that motion as noted in the recommendation, but it will be in a revised attachment 1.
Yeah.
Referencing 12,000 instead of 7,000. Excellent. Any other questions? Not seeing anyone on the board. Anyone wishing to speak to it? Also not seeing anyone. Please vote on the amended recommendation with the revised attachment 1.
Yes, Madam Clerk.
Yes.
Councillor Esslinger?
yes.
We have all the votes.
Excellent. Please display the vote. And that is carried 11-0. As I look up there, I realize that my side angle is not good because I have a giant nose. So I should stop looking to the side when those votes come in. That's great. I think the last piece we have is notices of motion. And not hearing or seeing any. In that case, we are adjourned at 10:49. Thanks, everyone.